This past June, my friend Dexter, my little sister Lucy, and I embarked on a long weekend camping trip to a popular state park a few hours away from our bustling city life. The state park was known for its beautiful scenery, diverse wildlife, and miles of hiking trails. We were eager to leave behind our everyday routines and immerse ourselves in nature. I had meticulously planned a variety of fun activities, including hiking, fishing, and a visit to a ghost town I had stumbled upon while mapping our trip. The ghost town intrigued me, mainly because I could find very little information about it online. The mystery surrounding it made the idea of visiting all the more exciting. We arrived at the park early on a Friday morning. The sun was shining, and the sky was a brilliant blue. After setting up our campsite, which was nestled in a quiet, wooded area with a clear view of a nearby lake, we decided to start our adventure by visiting the ghost town. We loaded our gear into my trusty old truck, a rugged vehicle that had seen its fair share of off-road adventures, and set the coordinates into the GPS. The drive began pleasantly enough. We chatted animatedly, our excitement palpable as we speculated about what we might find. The two-lane mountain road wound its way up into the hills, the trees growing denser as we climbed. The higher we went, the more the sun was blocked out by the thick canopy of leaves overhead, casting the road into an eerie twilight. As we continued, the road narrowed, eventually becoming a one-lane path. Civilization seemed to fall away behind us, the distance between any signs of human life growing until there were none. Dexter, who was usually quite laid back, started to express his concerns. "Are you sure about this? We have Lucy with us, and this is getting pretty remote," he said, glancing back at my sister, who was staring out the window, wide-eyed but excited. "I know, Dex, but we're almost there," I replied, trying to sound confident despite the growing unease in the pit of my stomach. The road had transformed from a paved lane to a much slimmer gravel path that barely fit our truck. I couldn't help but think about what would happen if another vehicle came from the opposite direction. There were no guardrails, and the drop-off along the mountain cliff was sheer and terrifying. Our excitement began to wane, replaced by a thick layer of concern. The drive was taking much longer than anticipated. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached a stop sign at the end of the gravel road. The dense trees abruptly gave way to a bright, sunlit clearing, and the road widened into a two-lane stretch once again. We all breathed a collective sigh of relief, even though there were still no signs of human life. The GPS instructed us to take the next right, and as we turned off the main road, we were once again on a one-lane gravel path. Ahead, we could see the ghost town. The old, weathered gray buildings stood silent and still, a stark contrast to the vibrant greenery surrounding them. We parked the truck and got out, taking in the sight. It was both eerie and fascinating. We had brought along our two dogs, a large chocolate lab named Max and a feisty Australian shepherd named Bella. The dogs were immediately on high alert, pulling at their leashes and sniffing the air. Bella's hackles went up, a clear sign that she sensed something unusual. As we explored the main road of the ghost town, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The town consisted of several old buildings, some standing tall while others had caved in over the years. I snapped a few photos, trying to capture the eerie beauty of the place. One house, in particular, caught my attention. It was much newer than the others, and it looked as though someone might actually live there. The front door was ajar, and I thought I saw movement inside. "Do you think someone lives there?" Lucy asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and fear. "I don't know," I replied, "but it looks like it. Maybe it's the caretaker of the ghost town." We walked past the house and a creepy, broken swing set that swayed slightly in the breeze, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. As we ventured deeper into the heart of the ghost town, the streets lined with old, gray buildings, I felt an increasing sense of unease. Dexter was busy taking photos of the interiors of some of the buildings, his curiosity piqued by what might be inside. "I don't want to go any further," I told Dexter. "Even though we're both armed, I don't feel safe here with Lucy." Dexter looked at me, sensing my growing discomfort. "All right, let's head back," he said, and we began making our way back to the truck. As we passed the newer house again, I noticed the front door was now closed. Lucy pointed it out, and Bella went berserk. She lunged towards the house, snarling and growling, making sounds I had never heard from her before. Max was on high alert too, his hackles up as he darted his eyes between the house and the rest of the town. We hurriedly climbed back into the truck, deciding to find a different route back rather than the treacherous path we had come in on. As we drove away, the tension in the truck was palpable. We were all relieved to be leaving, but the unease lingered. Later that evening, after we had settled back at our campsite and tucked Lucy into her bed in the camper, Dexter and I sat by the fire, going over the photos we had taken. As Dexter scrolled through his shots, his expression changed from one of amusement to one of fear. He began zooming in on the photos, his face growing paler with each one. Finally, he handed the phone to me, his hands trembling. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding as I took the phone from him. "Look at the windows," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at the photos and felt a chill run down my spine. In the windows of the old buildings, there were figures, short, light gray creatures with large heads and black eyes. On their foreheads and the sides of their heads were small nubs, possibly horns. One of them appeared to have wings lined with the same nubs. My mind raced as I tried to process what I was seeing. These were not human. As I scrolled through the photos, my thoughts kept returning to what could have happened. We had Lucy with us, and it could have been disastrous if these creatures had decided to confront us. We were lucky they stayed hidden inside the old buildings and didn't bother us. "Who do you think was in the newer house?" I asked Dexter, my voice shaking. "I don't know," he replied. "Maybe it was one of those creatures, or maybe it was a human living among them. Either way, I'm glad we didn't find out." We sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the fire the only sound. The questions in my mind seemed endless. Who or what were those creatures? Was the person in the newer house aware of them, or were they a prisoner in their own home? Had we unknowingly stumbled upon something far more sinister than a simple ghost town? I knew one thing for sure. I would never go back to that place. The risk was too great, and the fear too real. I didn't want to be responsible for anyone getting hurt or worse. As the fire died down and we prepared to turn in for the night, I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. We had escaped unscathed, but the memories of what we had seen would stay with us forever. The ghost town was a place of mystery and danger, a reminder that sometimes the things we can't see are the ones we should fear the most. The next morning, we packed up our campsite and headed home, eager to put the ghost town behind us. The drive back was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. Lucy slept in the back seat, blissfully unaware of the danger we had faced. Dexter and I exchanged glances, knowing that the experience had changed us both. Once home, life slowly returned to normal. The hustle and bustle of daily routines helped to push the memories of the ghost town to the back of our minds. But every now and then, something would trigger a flashback. A particular sound, a shadow in the corner of my eye, the sight of an old, weathered building. The fear would return, as fresh as the day it happened. I never shared the location of the ghost town with anyone, I didn't want to be responsible for leading others into potential danger. The mystery of the creatures and the person in the newer house remained unsolved, and I was content to leave it that way. Looking back, I realize how lucky we were. Our curiosity had led us to a place we were not prepared for, a place that held secrets beyond our understanding. The experience taught me to trust my instincts and to be cautious of the unknown. Some mysteries are better left unexplored, and some places are best left undisturbed. As I sit here, recounting this story, I hope it serves as a warning to others. The world is full of wonders and adventures, but it is also full of dangers. Be curious, but be careful, and always trust your instincts, for they might just save your life. I've always considered myself a rational person, someone who relies on logic and facts to navigate life. Ghost stories and supernatural tales were amusing, but never something I took seriously. However, a series of events in my childhood home challenged my skepticism and left me with a lingering sense of wonder and unease. This is the story of how I went from a non-believer to someone who had to accept that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. It all began when I was about 2 years old, and my family moved into a large, old house in a small village in the United States. The house was a relic from the late 1800s, with thick stone walls that were nearly 2 feet wide. It had a kind of charm that comes with age, but also an aura of mystery. The wooden floors creaked with every step, and the air was always a bit musty, no matter how much we cleaned. My older sister, Emma, was 5 at the time, and like any kids our age, we were excited to explore our new home. The property was expansive, with a large garden at the back, perfect for playing. At the edge of the garden were stacks of firewood, neatly arranged to dry. These piles were about 6 feet high and extended for about 15 feet, creating an imposing wall of logs. Our father often reminded us to be careful around them, but they became a favorite spot for our games of hide and seek. One warm summer day, in late July or early August, Emma and I were outside, enjoying the sun. The sky was a brilliant blue, with only a few fluffy clouds drifting lazily. We had been running around, chasing each other, when I decided to go inside to grab us some lemonade. Emma stayed behind, wandering near the firewood stacks, lost in her own world. As I returned, I saw Emma standing still, her face a mix of confusion and fear. I hurried over, my young mind immediately thinking she might have hurt herself. "Emma, are you okay?" I asked, concerned. She looked at me, her eyes wide. "I saw something," she whispered, a head peeking over the firewood. It moved along the top and then disappeared. I frowned. "Are you sure? Maybe it was Dad trying to scare you?" Emma shook her head vigorously. "No, it wasn't him. I followed it, but when I got to the end of the woodpile, there was nobody there. And then I felt this intense cold. It's so hot today, but it was freezing. Our dad had been inside with our mom the entire time, and the garden was fenced off, making it highly unlikely that anyone else could have sneaked in. Still, being the skeptic I was, I dismissed it as Emma's overactive imagination. We continued our play, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something strange had happened. As the years went by, Emma continued to experience odd occurrences. She would often tell us about seeing people who weren't there, hearing scratching noises at night, or the creaking of floorboards as if someone was walking around. I always shrugged it off, attributing it to the quirks of an old house or Emma's vivid imagination. Our mother, however, had her own encounters, especially at night. My dad worked the night shift, so it was often just us and our loyal German shepherd, Max, who was fiercely protective and made us feel safe. One particular incident my mom shared with me years later stands out. It was a quiet night, and as usual, my dad was at work. Mom was in bed, drifting in and out of sleep, when Max started barking furiously. This wasn't uncommon, as he sometimes barked at small animals outside, but it was enough to wake her up. Already awake, she decided to get a glass of water. As she got out of bed, she noticed a dark shadow creeping into the master bedroom from the hallway. At first, she thought it was just her sleepy mind playing tricks on her. But as the shadow moved, it started to lift itself from the wall and floor, floating in the middle of the room. It was an amorphous black mass, resembling the silhouette of a large stingray with a featureless head at the center. It began to move towards her, reaching out with fin-like appendages. Paralyzed with fear, she couldn't move or scream. Just as it seemed about to touch her, the apparition vanished into thin air. She remained frozen in place for several minutes, her heart pounding, before finally crawling back under the blankets. She didn't get her glass of water that night. Despite these unsettling experiences, I remained a skeptic. I never saw or heard anything myself, so it was easy to dismiss the stories as overactive imaginations or the quirks of an old house. But my perspective began to change after my grandmother passed away in 2021. My grandmother was a remarkable woman, full of life and wisdom. Her passing was a huge loss for our family, and we gathered at our childhood home to grieve and remember her. After the funeral, we sat together, sharing stories and memories. The house felt different that day, more somber, but also filled with a sense of her presence. As the evening wore on, the phone suddenly started ringing violently. It was one of those cordless phones in a base station, and the sound it made was not a normal ring but a rapid series of rings, something I had never heard before. My mom answered it, but there was only static on the other end. When she checked, there was no incoming call registered. It was bizarre and unsettling. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt the blanket being slowly pulled off my shoulder. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then I felt a warm hand gently rest on my shoulder. I knew I was alone in the room. The door was closed, and everyone else was asleep. Despite the strangeness of the situation, I didn't feel scared. Instead, I felt a profound sense of comfort and peace. Deep down, I knew it was my grandmother, saying her final goodbye. Over the years, I've had time to reflect on these experiences. The house we lived in had a history, one that we may never fully understand. The thick stone walls and creaky floors held secrets that we were only beginning to uncover. My sister's encounters, my mother's terrifying night, and my own experience with the phone and the blanket all pointed to something beyond the ordinary. I've come to accept that there are things in this world that defy explanation, events that challenge our understanding of reality. My grandmother's stories, once just entertaining tales, now hold a deeper meaning for me. They are reminders that the world is filled with mysteries, some of which we may never solve. Today, I approach life with a sense of wonder and curiosity, always open to the possibility that there is more to this world than meets the eye. And as I share my story, I hope to inspire others to embrace the unknown, to be open to the mysteries that surround us, and to find beauty in the unexplained. The memory of our old house remains vivid in my mind. The garden with its towering stacks of firewood, the cozy yet eerie rooms, and the feeling of being watched. All these elements combined to create an atmosphere that was both enchanting and unsettling. It was a place where the past and present seemed to converge, where the veil between the known and the unknown was thin. As I walk through life now, I carry these experiences with me. They have shaped who I am and how I see the world. They remind me that sometimes the most profound truths are the ones we cannot explain, the ones that lie just beyond the reach of our understanding. This was a horrifying experience that I can't explain. I've always been a skeptic, someone who needed concrete evidence before believing in anything out of the ordinary. But this particular event has left me confused for many years. Despite my skepticism, I experienced something so strange that it still haunts me to this day. It all began when I was about 10 years old, back in middle school. My best friend, Jay, would come over to my house every Saturday to hang out. We lived in a small, quiet town in rural Ohio. Our house was a typical two-story suburban home with a large backyard that bordered a dense forest. The neighborhood was peaceful, and the air always smelled fresh, with a hint of pine and earth. Jay and I were always pretty observant of our surroundings, so whenever something unusual happened, we were quick to point it out to each other. At that time, my younger sister had this small, realistic baby doll that could crawl on all fours if it had batteries. It was one of those toys that looked cute to some people, but always struck me as a bit creepy, especially with its blinking eyes. It hadn't been played with in years, and it usually just sat in a corner of the playroom, gathering dust. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Jay and I were hanging out in the playroom. The playroom was on the first floor, filled with an array of toys, a few beanbags, and shelves packed with books and games. The sunlight streamed in through the large window, casting a warm glow on the toys scattered around. We were busy playing a board game when we noticed something odd. The doll was positioned right in the center of the room. I vaguely recalled seeing it there, but thought it strange since my sister hadn't touched it in ages. I picked it up and threw it towards the toy crate, watching it bounce off the wall before landing on a pile of stuffed animals. We shrugged it off and decided to go outside to enjoy the nice weather. Our backyard was our personal adventure land, a sprawling expanse of green bordered by the forest. We spent a good hour playing basketball, climbing trees, and running around. It was one of those perfect childhood afternoons filled with laughter and boundless energy. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, we decided to head back inside. As soon as we stepped into the hallway leading to the playroom, Jay froze. His eyes were wide with shock, staring down the hallway. I followed his gaze and felt my heart skip a beat. There, crawling slowly towards us, was the doll. It moved in a jerky, unnatural manner, its old joints making soft, clicking noises with each movement. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. Our first thought was that my sister was playing a prank on us. It seemed like the most logical explanation, but when we called out her name, there was no response. We grabbed the doll, which let out a mechanical cry, and began searching the house for her. My heart was pounding, and my mind raced with confusion. How could the doll be moving? It shouldn't have been able to work without fresh batteries, and I knew for a fact that the ones inside it were old and corroded. We checked every room, calling her name, but found nothing. Eventually, we discovered her sound asleep in her bedroom, completely unaware of what was happening. I felt a mix of relief and growing unease. If it wasn't her, then who or what was moving the doll? We decided to bury the doll under a pile of toys in the playroom, hoping to avoid any further creepy incidents. For a few weeks, everything seemed normal. Jay and I continued our regular weekend routines, almost forgetting about the strange event. Then, one weekend, something even more unsettling happened. We were sitting at the dining room table, chatting and sipping sodas. The dining room was adjacent to the living room, which had two large bookshelves filled with all sorts of knickknacks and books. As I was talking, Jay suddenly spit his drink all over the table. I was about to laugh, thinking he had choked on his soda, but the terrified look on his face stopped me. He pointed behind me, unable to speak. I turned slowly, dread building up inside me. There, perched on top of one of the tall bookshelves, was the doll. It was facing us, its unblinking eyes seemingly fixed on us. My mind raced. How could it have gotten up there? Neither Jay nor I could have reached that high without a ladder. It made no sense. We ran outside to find my mom, who was tending to the garden. I was almost out of breath as I asked her if she had moved the doll. She looked genuinely confused and said she had no idea what we were talking about. The fear in her eyes told me she wasn't lying or playing a prank on us. My mom was a practical woman, not one to mess around with creepy dolls, especially not to scare her own kids. At that point, Jay and I were freaking out. We were convinced there was something very wrong with that doll. We asked my mom to get it down for us. Once she did, we took it far outside to the garbage cans by the edge of our property and threw it away, hoping that would be the end of it. For a few weeks, it seemed like our problem was solved. We resumed our usual activities, playing in the backyard, watching movies, and generally enjoying our weekends. The memory of the doll began to fade, replaced by the normalcy of our everyday lives. Then one morning, everything changed again. It was a Saturday, and Jay wasn't over yet. I woke up early and headed to the kitchen to grab some breakfast. Our kitchen had a glass door that led out to the front porch. As I approached the door, I froze in my tracks. Outside, halfway down the walkway leading to the glass doors, was the doll. It was positioned as though it had been crawling towards the house, its face pressed against the ground. Panic surged through me. How could it be here? We had thrown it away weeks ago. My mind raced with possible explanations, but none made sense. I called for my mom, trying to keep my voice steady. When she saw the doll, her face went pale. She immediately went outside, picked it up, and said she would take care of it. I trusted her, but the whole situation left me feeling deeply unsettled. Later, I asked her what she had done with the doll. She told me she had waited for it to dry, then burned it and tossed the remains in the garbage bin. That seemed final enough, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. Jay and I never had any more strange experiences with the doll, but the memory of those events lingered. To this day, I still wonder what could have possibly caused those incidents. None of my family members would have pranked us like that, and it didn't make sense for anyone else to be involved. Despite my skepticism, this experience remains one of the few things in my life that I just can't explain. As an adult, I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was a series of coincidences, or perhaps there was some logical explanation that I just haven't figured out yet. But every time I think back to those moments, the doll crawling down the hallway, sitting atop the bookshelf, and lying on the walkway, I can't shake the feeling that something truly inexplicable occurred. Now, whenever I see a doll, a chill runs down my spine. It's a reminder of that strange time in my childhood, a time when the lines between reality and the supernatural seem to blur. While I remain a skeptic, this experience has left a mark on me, a lingering question that may never be answered. And so, I share this story not just to entertain, but to perhaps connect with others who have had similarly unexplainable experiences. Life is full of mysteries, and sometimes, the most we can do is acknowledge them and move forward, forever changed by the things we cannot fully understand. Okay, that's all for tonight. And I love to hear all of your experiences. So if you have one, leave me a comment or drop me an email. Again, don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Thank you for your continued support. Thank you for joining me tonight. Until next time, pleasant dreams.